Okay, the final speaker for this morning's session is Dr. Blake Simmons. Dr. Simmons is the director of the Biological Systems and Engineering Division of Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. And he's CTO at the Joint Bioenergy Institute. Blake's focus is development of technologies for biomass breakdown to produce biofuels and bioproducts. Blake has over 350 publications, 50 patents, and is the co-founder of 2 startup companies in renewable energy and bioenergy. Blake's a little bit under the weather, so he couldn't travel here today, but he sent us a recorded presentation we're going to show now. Thank you. Go ahead.
Francisco, and I want to thank the conference organizers for giving me the ability to record this presentation and give it to you virtually. And I also understand that I'm the last one before lunch, so I'll get to it and hopefully be quick about it. And if you have any comments, you can reach me via email at basimmons@lbl.gov. Motivation of this talk.
Technical stuff, right? Biopolymers and all that jazz. They had solved this problem earlier out in the Naleo truck, so I think you can get it. There you go, from the crowd. Greg, our jokester. Ooh, sorry.
Hi, everyone. This is Blake Simmons, Division Director for Biological Systems and Engineering at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. And today I'm going to be talking about mobile biorefineries as a distributed biomanufacturing approach for the production of biofuels and bioproducts that is community-based. I wish to express my regrets that I couldn't be there in person with you. I'm recovering from an illness, so I would much rather be in Hawaii than stuck in San Francisco. And I want to thank the conference organizers for giving me the ability to record this presentation and give it to you virtually. And I also understand that I'm the last one before lunch, so I'll get to it and hopefully be quick about it. And if you have any comments, you can reach me via email at basimmons@lbl.gov. Motivation of this talk and the effort that we have at Berkeley Lab is to build the circular carbon economy. And this is basically a waste not, want not approach to managing carbon as you go from a raw material extraction to product design, production and biomanufacturing, consumption and waste management. And it's basically an offshoot of the overall greenhouse gas emission reduction program from the Bioenergy Technologies Office and others at the Department of Energy and nationwide priorities of the Biden administration. And Berkeley Lab has multiple programs and capabilities that are part of this effort and are really getting into how to streamline and maximize the carbon conversion efficiency at every step of the process and try to minimize any of these residual waste streams that are here. Biomanufacturing enables the circular economy by basically providing a platform technology that is readily scaled, affordable and scalable, that can take a wide variety of inputs, be it from terrestrial biomass crops and other renewable resources such as algae, and take intermediates that you can derive from those feedstocks in the form of sugars, lignin-derived intermediates, and amino acids, and convert them into things that we use petroleum for their production of currently. So that includes biofuels, chemicals, and bioproducts and biomaterials. And what you want is basically a facile, feedstock agnostic way of converting all of these sustainable and renewable inputs into everything that you can to displace the use of fossil fuels. Now, one of the challenges associated with this effort is that biomass is distributed. And unlike some of the massive oil fields and coal deposits that enable centralization, both in terms of refining and conversion and distribution, that if you take a look at just at the potential biomass availability across the continent of the United States, not only you have regional variation in terms of high density in population terms, but also in terms of the speciation and varieties that are available as potential bioenergy crops for the production of these biofuels and bioproducts. And if you take a look at just an example in California, we have about 78 million bone-dry tons available per year, and the biomass that's considered to be available on a technically sustainable basis is about 35 to 40 million bone-dry tons a year. With that, it's parsed out into three basic types. You have those biomass resources that are associated with municipal solid waste, those that are associated with agricultural residues, and some that are in forestry resources. And I want to call your attention to this one in particular because with the convergence of wildfire risk, environmental pollution associated with wildfires, and then also the need to do something with forest thinnings as part of the Healthy Forest Program, I'll be talking about a mobile solution a little bit later on in this talk. But regardless of what your biomass resources are by type, you need to be able to efficiently harvest it, convert it, and reuse all the carbon inputs and outputs to enable that circular approach to the bioeconomy. And you need a diversified portfolio of bio-related options and chemistry-related options at all steps of the process so that you can handle not only just one of these feedstock types, but hopefully coming up with technologies that convert mixtures of all three. And so you need better crops, better conversion technologies, and products to enable that to happen. Now, while I'm located in California, I also wanted to just give a quick summary of Hawaii in terms of the biomass, bioenergy, and biofuels power within that state. Hawaii is the most oil-dependent state in the United States. The biomass is distributed across all islands, and with the Hawaii's goals of renewable energy production for 100% by 2050, I believe, that biomass conversion into biopower for renewable electrons is very important. In addition to biopower, there are things like sustainable aviation fuels that are an interesting target for island nations such as Hawaii to consider in making. And again, you need to have this efficient harvesting, conversion, and reuse of all carbon inputs and outputs in order to enable that to happen. And so there have been, for example, some biopower plays that have been blocked by public response to it in terms of not in my backyard for renewable energy production and basically a combustion-free type approach to renewable power generation. But I will say that biomass in particular has a role to play, especially in regional development of solutions that go beyond biopower in the form of biofuels and bioproducts. But what is needed is a community-based approach to this technology rollout that includes public-private partnerships that can benefit the local communities in which these technologies are deployed, and not just the traditional barbarians at the gate with a company coming in and saying, we're going to build this site and we're going to derive profit from it and it'll be mainly taken outside of the community. What you really want are a bunch of homegrown solutions that are deployed at the local level that are incentivized by interest and support from the local region in which it is deployed. And one of the reasons why this distributed approach may be beneficial, especially in terms of island nations, in addition to the continental United States, is that in the conventional biorefinery approach, and you can make this the case for the conventional biopower approach as well, you take things like these different energy crops, you store them, you transport them into these massive elevators and storage systems, you then feed them into the biorefinery where you crack them into your final product. You store them in the case of like a fit for purpose, a blendable hydrocarbon. You need to blend it into the distribution stream. And then yet again, it is stored. And then finally, it is distributed to these retail outputs. Now, that approach can work in certain circumstances. And in fact, that is basically taking the page of conventional petroleum refining and applying that for biorefineries. And certainly that is the conventional wisdom best approach for how to do it. But centralized biomass conversion doesn't always work. And in the case of the biopower of 1.0 in California, if you will, we had, for example, biomass from forest thinnings and other distributed ag residues that then were transported to a biomass power station. And you had high transportation costs, labor, greenhouse gas emissions, and capital costs associated with that entire enterprise. And so you had low revenue selling power to utilities. And in fact, the one takeaway among several in the Biopower 1.0 game in California and elsewhere in the nation is that the only people that made money out of this enterprise were the people that moved it from point A to point B. And so there are severe limits to conventional approaches to the efficient conversion of biomass thinnings that are generated in remote locations. And so if you take, for instance, a decentralized biorefinery approach, where you have farming or agrarian communities that have basically a decentralized and distributed biomass conversion center. And then you can take it into a more densified intermediate that you can then ship off to a biorefinery, chemical industry, and manufacturing industry. Then you get a better hedge on the distribution and transportation costs up front that could be beneficial at the overall enterprise level. And if you take a look at comparing centralized and decentralized approaches, certainly when you get the centralization and the benefit of scale, that may work in certain circumstances, it may not work in all. And especially in states like Hawaii or in rural areas throughout the United States, you may want to take a decentralized approach that slices up the conundrum into more easily digestible parts that can value the biomass at the source, convert it at the source at which it is grown or harvested and stored, and then generate products that can be distributed into that local community, as well as some that can be shipped out of the community to drive the profit margins up. And so one example of this that I'll come to next is trying to solve the wildfire problem. And then in California in 2020 alone, we had these massive wildfires that are outbreaking and have been increasing in severity and uptake over the past several decades. But in 2020 alone, it was reported that the California wildfires suffered about $400 billion worth of damages, and the firefighting cost well in excess of $1 billion. In addition to just the economic cost and the impact of these wildfires, in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, it's been estimated that for the past several cycles, most notably 2018, 2019, and 2020, that the emissions and particulate damage released by these wildfires exceeded all of the conservation measures, such as the low carbon fuel standard, in terms of emission reductions. And so it is an extraordinary amount of carbon that's going up into the atmosphere, a lot of associated economic impact as well, but also human health impact in terms of particulate and criteria pollutant emissions that are just going unfettered into the atmosphere. And so how do you solve this multi-billion-dollar wildfire problems? You have the cost of the wildfires, you have the advancing rate of forest die-off due to climate change, and also like the lodgepole beetle kill-off through infestations as a result of that climate change as well. You want to be able to look at these criteria emissions and the greenhouse gas emissions as well. And primarily the the major tool that the state has used to date and other regions in the world have used are prescribed burns. And these are basically controlled burns where you clear out the undergrowth of an old growth forest of a new growth forest and turn it into something like an old growth forest. But these controlled burns can only be performed when weather conditions are favorable and at certain points of the year. There's a significant amount of permitting and controlling regulations that need to be followed. And the buildup of brush and trees often require extensive thinning before prescribed burns can even be put in place. And regardless of whether it's a wildfire or a controlled or prescribed burn, you still have the emissions associated with the activity. And sometimes, as we just saw recently in the United States, you could have a prescribed or controlled burn that goes out of control and becomes a wildfire in and of itself. So what you really want to do, if you have the wherewithal and the means, is to come up with an alternative to controlled burns and that mitigates not only wildfire risk, but also reduces emissions profiles completely relative to the state's goals or the nation's goals relative to greenhouse gas emissions. And so one platform that Berkeley Labs is associated with that looks very promising is the development of a mobile biorefinery unit that could go out and be transported to where the biomass is and address all these four problem areas. And the approach is rather simple and elegant in construct, but the truth is always in the details. You take these forestry thinnings and residues where they're generated from wildfire risk reduction activities and clearing out the undergrowth from forests to increase their resilience and robustness and resistance to wildfires. And in the process, you generate a lot of carbon. And right now, there is no fit-for-purpose solution to the forestry biomass carbon that you generate. And they have basically these hills of forestry biomass that are just sitting and going to rot out in the field. And so the notion here is that we would have this Caribou platform, which is based on this inclined rotary gasifier from SUNY Cobleskill, integrated with a microturbine and put onto an easily transported platform that can be taken out into the forest with the CAL FIRE clearing teams and then used to clear out the brush and the undergrowth and convert it into products, biopower, and biofuels. And it's important to note that the biofuels we generate are fit-for-purpose hydrocarbons that don't require any exogenous catalyst that is typically associated with upgrading gasification output in syngas into a liquid hydrocarbon. And the nature of this inclined rotary gasifier is that you recirculate the vapors that are generated in the syngas and recirculate them and autocrack them into long linear hydrocarbons that are typically between C5 and C12 in nature. Now, the general approach lends itself very well to distributed biomass conversion in the field, and so it can go anywhere, seasonal or set schedule or not, or as the need rises, to generate local electricity for vehicles and equipment. It can, with the microturbine in place, it can take the residual syngas vapors that aren't cracked into the liquid hydrocarbons and convert them into electrons. It can generate a biofuel that can be transported and sold, and it has efficient conversion of forestry thinnings that are on site. And it can also support the remote fire crew itself in terms of the operations and independent operations out in the field for extended periods of time. It also enables distributed biomass conversion at a local facility. You could co-locate this with a local food processor, for example. And in Modesto, we've taken a look at placing it at places like Del Monte food processing plants, and then combining it with the forestry residuals that you get from the forest and co-feeding them into the gasifier. And that way you can save on retail electricity rates and gas rates. You can generate electricity for the vehicles that are there. You can sell the carbon credits and maybe a subsidy from it, and you can get cogeneration and enable twice the energy capture. So if you take a look at this new forest management approach and the economic impacts, it's definitely a complementary technology to other forestry management practices. It is shovel-ready for local investment in counties with low incomes and high unemployment. I'll get to that in just a minute. And it also is a significant role to play in fire risk mitigation with the public and private cost savings that are generated from clearing out that forestry material and generating healthy forests as a result. And if you take a look at this overlay of different factors, such as the risk management and economic opportunity provided in the state, and I would put forward that this is most often the case when you take a look at these rural regions throughout the United States. You take a look at the high risk of fire hazard, and you see that in red highlighted here. You take a look at zones of economic activity and depressed economic activity in particular, and then you take a look at regions of unemployment. There is this, I call it the unholy triad of overlap, where those rural regions that are historically underserved and disadvantaged could benefit from the deployment of this technology and create local jobs and local products that benefit the economy in that region. And then it also increases the quality of life in terms of decreasing the risk of wildfires and decreasing health risks associated with criteria, pollutants, and emissions. And so when you take a look at assessing technology deployment, especially for the Caribou platform, is how can we be most effective in deploying and scaling it rapidly? How do we come up with scenario-based modeling for optimizing the long-term risk management and low-carbon biomass potential? And look at an explicit spatial assessment of capacity, logistics, life cycle emissions, and opportunities for public-private partnerships. And so as part of that analysis, we're looking at the Caribou deployment scenarios in that it can be a core technology that can be scaled to fit mobile and centralized processing units. And you get the best of both worlds in terms of flexible technology development and also penetration into the market in which it is there. It's applicable in all regions, including Hawaii and other island nations that have this great testbed region development where you can partner with local communities, build these technologies and deploy them there, turn them over to the municipalities and public regions that run and manage them, and derive the benefit of it, both in terms of economic job creation and environmental benefit combined into one. And so by using this community-centered development, including profit sharing and job creation in remote regions, you may be able to overcome some of the not in my backyards phenomenon that we've seen in multiple regions throughout the world. Future incarnations of the technology could integrate biopower and biofuel bioproduct generation in terms of like taking its syngas that is generated by the gasifier and fermenting that using a biological unit operation. And then looking at sugar production and conversion. So, for instance, sugar mills were big in Hawaii. A lot of the power generation came from burning the sugarcane bagasse. Maybe you could set up sugar mills, but instead they'd be power mills for production of the biopower, biofuels, and bioproducts in a synergistic way. And again, these technologies can be scaled and deployed in multiple regions. I've focused a lot on the mobile unit, but it can be scaled all the way from 100 pounds an hour up to 10 tons an hour theoretically, and using a mixture of feedstocks that can be very easily and readily converted by this technology, and including looking at how you can combine ag residues and forestry thinning and feedlot runoff conversion in rural areas, and basically create a circular carbon economy anywhere you're at, anytime you're there, in terms of maximizing the carbon that is available to you and maximizing the economic and environmental and health benefit from it. So in summary, we're providing a solution that can scale in both a centralized and distributed way that is essential to accessing and benefiting the economic regions of interest. Mobility, go to where the biomass is. Minimize transportation emissions and activities as much as you can, whenever you can. And we think that this is a vast opportunity space for robust public-private partnerships. And the state, agency, industry defines the equipment and rules, especially in terms of permitting these operations. That's a critical factor to be made aware of very early on in the process to make sure you come up with a technology that is fit for purpose in all public policy domains. And then I think in terms of the revenue generated, allow for significant scale up and employment opportunities, and also in this partnership modality in terms of community-based outreach and empowerment. With that, I thank you for your time. I apologize if my voice is rough. The illness I'm dealing with is impacting my ability to communicate effectively, but I hope I got the job done regardless. I hope you all have a great time at the conference and enjoy Hawaii, and aloha. Thank you for your time.